All right, looks like we're recording here, which was excellent. As I mentioned in class on Thursday, that the quiz will be opened on the 19th and stay open until Tuesday or so. But just don't wait till the last minute to take the quiz. But make sure you complete your reading, because I'll mention some stories, for instance, that we'll see part of tomorrow on Thursday. But I just want you to be prepared to make sure you've read, for instance, these sections on. Oops, I see I have music on. I apologize. Uh, Finally got it set up, so I was taking advantage of it. um, anyway, I think there are 23 questions for this week, and they go over the assigned readings. And much of the material I've already covered, but I'll go over a bit. As soon as I as I mentioned in class, um, that a story like Beauty and the Beast has a pretty long tradition. Uh, and going back, to the Golden Ass, as I told you, is that the probably the earliest known version then of this long-standing tale is probably even longer in some ways, or the same time span as Cinderella, which we think probably came from China. The Beauty and the Beast, the longest one, is the story of Cupid and Psyche, where Psyche is in love with a god who only comes to her at night and says, "You can't look on me," and the sisters, jealous sisters, take advantage of her innocence and her loveliness and vulnerability. To make her look at him with a candle, and the wax falls on him, and she goes on a quest to regain his support and love, which she eventually does. But it's to say that a lot of these stories are quite ancient, and we see that they continue to be made um, and remade, which attests to what we've been talking about, is what I've called the protean capacity of these stories to adapt. Now, for most of you and most of your parents and those younger than you, there, like I say, as you look in the list there of all the Snow White versions available on the Seven Dwarfs, the version that has had the most significant impact on children today, and children even of my generation, is Disney's Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs. And as I told you in that one, the dwarfs, thank you, are fine on their own. They don't need the domestic help that Snow White um, provides in the Disney version. And in some of the other versions, I mean, as soon as Disney makes it, it becomes another version. And I'm not going to say it's not the true version, but there are other versions where the males are able to take care of themselves. And as I told you, the Grimm version made fun of in the Annie Sexton poem, um, the Annie Sexton describes Snow White as a Playboy bunny, beautiful and, in her estimation, really dumb, because she is told by the dwarfs, don't talk to strangers, and she keeps doing it until she's finally nailed with the poison apple. But along the same line, I mentioned today. I mentioned just Gubar and Gilbert. They wrote a book called The Madwoman in the Attic, which is about a Jane Eyre story, um, or the Jane Eyre, where the Rochester keeps his crazy wife from Martinique in the Caribbean in the attic. And that this story has fairy tale qualities about it. But Gilbert and Goulart argue that a tale like Snow White really should be changed to Snow White and her wicked stepmother. And there we got into these whole ideas about stepmothers who become wicked in for instance, the Grimm version of Hansel and not Hansel and Gretel. Yes, Hansel and Gretel. It's the stepmother, not the mother. And Disney kind of creates this character between a kind of a wolf and a nasty woman that you get this portrayal of the jealous stepmother who's just upset about Cinderella's Snow White's beauty. Um, and Gubar and Gilbert's not on the quiz, but denotes that we find these fairy tales, the ones that uphold the status quo of the period, like Beauty and the Beast. You find that we either have a um, what do we call him? The angel in the house or the wicked stepmother. And mostly women appear in those two extremes. So, you have the wicked stepmother, but you also have the angel in the house. The perfect woman often shows up in Dickens novels, as in Joe's wife in what is it, Pip? Great Expectations. And so the opposite would be, of course, the stepmother in Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs, but also in any number of other tales, such as Cinderella. And those where Cinderella is the angel in the house who's reinstated where she belongs. And the problem with someone with a book like Gubar and Gilbert is that they'll use the two of them, excellent scholars. I mean, it's a groundbreaking book on feminist literature. Looked and the version that they use to make their story is a version that they see as the standard, and that's the Disney version. Other versions of Snow White do not follow that pattern, you see. So you always want to be careful when you look at which versions people are using to make points. We have a similar problem actually, well, with Bluebeard. And Bluebeard stands alone among fairy tales, as the Zipes introduction says, in its depiction of marriage as an institution haunted by the threat of murder. And in Perrault's Bluebeard, I think it says Bluebeard, Bear, bear, a typo on the quiz. The Perrault, in his moral to his stories, and most of them are, with winks and things like that in the salon, says that, well, he compares the wife in Bluebeard, the ones who get in trouble, and the one who actually ends up overcoming the threat by getting Bluebeard killed for all his murders, compares the wife to Eve and Pandora. And ironically, the idea there is, well, it's her curiosity that undid her. And if you look in the notes for the stories, you'll see links to, which I couldn't find in the book, Maury Tetar's book I brought with me. But the idea is that Pandora and Eve caused lots of problems because of their curiosity. She ate of the apple, and Pandora opened the box. That's why I call it Pandora's box, and let, evil and stuff into the world. So there's actually a picture in one of and I'm trying to remember who did the drawing for that, but it's one of the three, I think it was Walter Crane, who does the drawing. And well, the curious wife in Bluebeard is going down the steps into the basement and to try the key. On the back of the wall is a picture from the Garden of Eden, with Eve reaching for the apple. So the ironic moral of the story for the almost humorist, if you will, Perrault is that just as with Little Red Riding Hood, it's her fault because she's just was naive and therefore easy pickings for the courtly seducer. Changed in Grimm, of course, to a warning about you must obey your parents. Now, there are very, very many of the versions of Little Red Riding Hood, and I hope you have fun with all of them. We'll talk more about them on Thursday and then on next Tuesday. You have Ruby, Mrs. Mastiff, is the lead women in that one, and we're going to see it's a mouse and cats and a really creepy lizard, and dogs. Mrs. Mastiff is a large dog, and that Ruby is this cute little mouse who's picked on by the cats and mouses, they go after each other. It's a very much a fable one that takes place in the city, as a matter of fact, where probably more kids will be able to identify with the characters than those who would live in the countryside with actual wolves. And at the end of the story, we know that the women, Ruby, and the dog, Mrs. Mastiff, no men involved there. They overcome the cat, and in fact, Mrs. Mastiff, to give you an idea of what happened, wears at the story's conclusion the cat's hat. Miss Ruby is a fun story. You start thinking in the beginning, uh-oh, she's going to be in trouble, but you know, she has what we would call agency, and she's smart, and she's not going to be done in by these old stories like the one in the. There's Roald Dahl's version. A less famous one is James Thurber's. Is that in the end she shoots the wolf, and the um, and says, well, nowadays little young girls can't be fooled by these kinds of things. And the Roald Dahl version, it pulls out a pistol from her knickers and does the wolf in and wears the wolf's hat, coat. It wears a wolf coat at the end of the story. Lots of versions, again, with the empowered woman. And talked about we discussed Ted Hughes's wonderful story, The Iron Giant, a movie version of which is available, and the sequel to it I showed you is The Iron Woman. They weren't written for an adult audience, okay? They were written for youngsters and then adolescents, but they became very well read. Very popular amongst adults too, and that remains the case. For they're both, quite good story. Especially the Iron Giant, that's made into was in the beginning. The title was the Iron Man, became the Iron Giant when they made the movie about it. And I've mentioned, and we've talked about so many of these different genres we enter, whether it's going to be fables and whatnot. There weren't originally written for children, just as today fairy tales aren't written only for children. And a book like Wicked and The Ugly Stepmother by the same author, to give you an example, those are not written for children, and either is The Tiger, which I made available for you, which is a modern feminist reading of Beauty and the Beast, on which you're welcome to write an essay. So they're written for both children and adults now. And and it is true in the later volumes of the tales, the Grimm brothers did modify the story to make them more quote unquote suitable for children. And in this case, that also meant more suitable, more violent. And we see this in many of the stories, including Little Red Riding Hood, and that's to teach a lesson. So, if you're going to use a fairy tale at this particular time when fairy tales are making inroads into what we would call contemporary literature, you have to be careful to make sure that they had strong morals to them, and very, very much evident. But now we find in the more, and by the way, it was the same way with Perrault. He did not write his fairy tales specifically for children at the French court. They came to be used that way. But he was writing, remember, in the salon environment, and it was the uppity crust, and you wanted to make the language very precise, special, and so they have their literary value that way. Now, among the many versions is that you read or will read is Walter de la Mare's Little Red Riding Hood. Walter de la Mare is a very important writer of children's literature. And in his Little Red Riding, he likes to have fun with the stories a great deal of the time. So in his version, as I mentioned in class, the Little Red Riding Hood is incredibly vain, and the grandmother is not much of a help. uh, and both of them get eaten, um, as happens in one of the versions of the Grimm version has two of them. One she um, is escaped or gets eaten, and that's the end. And another one is the forester, the a symbol of male patriarchy, if you will. Um, Comes and rescues Little Red Riding Hood, and as soon as she comes out, bursting out of the abdomen slash womb of the male wolf, she runs to make sure her hair looks okay. You know, she's very, very, very vain. On the other hand, you have Tony Ungera's version of Little Red Riding Hood, and in this one, um, the wolf is both courtly and rather hilarious. And the grandmother is nasty, nasty, drunk, jaded ex singer. And, sometimes you shouldn't listen to tradition, is probably one of the messages here. Because she marries the wolf. And as I may have mentioned in class, and certainly the notes or the video does, that this would be seen as attack when Uninger's writing against miscegenation laws, and not just that, but social pressures that would say that the marriage between races, whether it's like my brother-in-law is married to a Japanese woman, and things of that nature. Matter of fact, my daughter's very much involved with a Chinese Thai man, but these would be seen as very bad. And so the joinery of the thing, I mean, it does say through the story, by manipulating the characters and whatnot, that perhaps you should question some of these traditions. And so he's having fun, but at the same time, there's a strong statement in there about how we live. Now, and then another, we've seen that kind of a question of the status quo in The Reluctant Dragon, where Kenneth Grahame undercuts the violent traditional norm of many fairy tales that might makes right. Uh, and I mean, he's a kind of a pacifist, if you will, and then we see the world wars that come about, and we see that the message in there was a powerful one. Same with the Iron Giant. I said Ted Hughes' major, his claim is that youngsters deserve to know the truth, and we have to use, as I've mentioned in class, the prophylactic to protect them. But Ted Hughes deals with real social issues related to the Cold War politics and the dangers of technology, what I would call dual use technologies, and perhaps the great tragedy is that story and the film on which it's based. I mean, and the film that's based on the story remain quite relevant today, with our concerns over the fears of massive destructive weapons and weapons of mass destruction, I should say. And so this is the literature that questions the status quo, questions the world around us, and revealing some of its complexity. Now, you have finished reading Skeleton Man, and we notice that in one of her awake dreams, Molly is told by the rabbit that the man she now lives with is not human. And we're going to have this kind of relationship between the story about Skeleton Man, this tale of wonder told by the Iroquois Indians, concerns life today. The stories, in other words, as it suggested, still speak to us. And Molly has to use her intelligence to kind of go through the dreams and reality to find ways in which the story is revelatory. It helps her. For instance, in Skeleton Man, a rabbit tells her that her parents are buried. Now, she's already seen those rooms, as I recall. And so you can see that this could be herself generating these connections in her dreams, or what she would call awake dreams. She's not in so deep asleep that the dreams are not related to what goes on with her, but her parents say these stories, i.e., and the dreams, um, can help you. And we see too that Molly, as the father calls him, the warrior girl and whatnot, but her she is anything by anything. She's not a deep sleeper. In other words, she can, and we learn that she can hear her mother or father coming from a distance, and so she's kind of like the Molly stays awake. uh, is the I can't remember the exact name he calls her, but it's certainly not anything about her inability, her so that she sleeps so much that anybody can sneak up on her. It's the opposite. And another one. Towards the ending of the story, in one of her awake dreams, that's the point where Molly's not looking at the character, not looking at someone who's somewhat like her. She becomes the character, and she follows the rabbit through this place that's familiar to her, but it's from long ago. She's been to it today and knows where the paths are and stuff, and she follows the rabbit, and by she actually escapes the skeleton man by making him fall into a deep ravine when he tries to cross a log that Molly uses as a bridge, and she pushes it to the side, and he falls in. Um, I think it's a piece of plywood, but it's still a bridge in the actual attack or flight from the skeleton man uncle. And Molly is named too. Not only does she have connections, as we know when we were talking in class with the Broadway hit of the unsinkable Molly Brown, but she's also named after Molly Brant, and a Mohawk woman and warrior, and all the way back from the Revolutionary War. And as I suggested, you could look her up, and I may well have her linked her or mentioned certainly this connection. Um, and again, I mean, the skeleton man in Molly's father had worked as a construction worker on high-rise buildings in New York. The Mohawks are famous for that. But at the present, and this is why the father and the mother are abducted, the mothers to frighten the father into revealing information, codes, or whatever from the bank at which he works and the sister banks in the area. Again, he is not literally a cannibal, but he is living off of other people and through fraud and whatnot. So that you can see again a connection between the fairy tale or tale of wonder and how it applies to the actual world. Um, and again, I told you to watch that scar because Molly actually gets one from a chain link fence when she's crawling away to escape the uncle. And so, in this kind of story, you have to be willing to believe the Indian stories. They're connected with a reality, and part of the whole thing is that Molly has to get to the point where she actually gets the scar to be successful in evading um, the threat, and that threat. You know, as is suggested, the end of the Skeleton Man is not the death of Skeleton Man. And in the end of the Tale of Wonder, and in the end of our story, we never learn, they never find any evidence, not only of where the guy fell, but also there's no name. And I suggested the having no name and the idea that he had fallen suggests that the story is a disturbing one in the sense that it has a happy ending with a warning. And that is to say, it's not just life happily ever after or anything like that, because in fact, there's evil in the world, and one has to um, one has to take evil into consideration. Uh, so it's an admonitory tale. It admonishes and admonitory. It serves as a warning, and it's also interesting. So what you have, and edifying. So you have here Joseph Bruchac is doing something quite contemporary, and to suggest that these stories talk about the reality. Although they're tales of wonder, there is the sense, indeed, that there is evil in the world and one must take care because you can't rid the world of evil. You have to learn how to live with it and avoid it. So there you go for this week. I hope you all do a good job on the quiz. And if you have any questions, well, you know how to get